What's going on, people? Welcome to United View and welcome back to the Tactical View. It is the start of a really exciting week for United fans with a trip to Barcelona on Thursday, followed by in 10 days' time the return leg, and we've got the Carabao Cup final. So it's the start of a really exciting period, and this week as well we've got potentially the first round of bids for the club coming in as well by Friday, so things are looking really exciting. For now though, this is the Tactical View. We'll be taking a look back at both the home game and the away game against Leeds United, seeing what went wrong, what could be done better, and how United played it all tactically. So let's get into the show. So first things first, in terms of both games that we faced against Leeds, we faced a similar sort of style of play in both, fairly similar personnel from Leeds on both occasions. And what's quite interesting to note about Leeds now is that compared to under Marcelo Bielsa, when they had a very distinct sort of man-oriented type of pressing, where sort of specifically each player would have a particular opposition player to lock onto and follow everywhere they go, now it's much more ball-oriented, and that comes from Jesse Marsch and the Red Bull system. That's something they do quite a lot of, and we'll come back to that later in terms of the implications it had for Manchester United and how it made life so difficult for us. In terms of personnel that Leeds have got here, what's really interesting to note is obviously this midfield pivot here, the American pivot of Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie. There is a lot of running power in that pivot, and just as we discussed last week in terms of United playing with 10 men towards the end of the game, when we had Fred, we had Sabitzer, we had Bruno Fernandes putting in an incredible amount of work, sort of covering between the three of them the entire width of the pitch. That's what the Leeds United players were doing. The amount of work they got through was absolutely fantastic and made life really difficult for United. So I think as much as people are saying that United probably didn't play to our best, you've got to give Leeds a lot of credit for the way they set up, and it caused us all sorts of problems. In terms of individual quality though, there's not an awful lot in the Leeds team. Junior Firpo's pretty suspect at left back. Luke Ayling, he's done all right in the past two games to be fair to him, but normally he's not the best of players. I think the star quality really in this team, if you're going to pick it out, obviously comes from Nonto, who is pretty tricky and difficult to sort of dispossess, really good in tight spaces with the ball at his feet, and Jack Harrison's a solid player as well. Bamford's not really back to his best after the injury, and Somerville can cause problems as well at times. So, with that said, let's get in and have a little look at how Leeds caused us issues at Old Trafford. So, first things first then, in terms of, I'll just adjust that so we can see what's going on. But in terms of the way they set up, Leeds came to Old Trafford with no desire to sort of sit back and just let United have loads of opportunities to get the ball forward, create loads of chances. Leeds were aggressive right from the very start. They came and wanted to get themselves on the score sheet. And the way they sort of tried to do that was by forcing as many issues as possible from United, try and turn the ball over as much as possible near to United's goal. And what we've seen with this Leeds team, as we've seen many times down the years, is that they basically play chaos ball. They try as much as possible to cause chaos in the opposition ranks, whether that's by pressing, whether that's by sort of winning their duels, all that sort of stuff. And as I mentioned at the start then, with their sort of propensity to press in a ball-oriented way. What I mean by that is that this is the team that United started with in the home game, and what you'd see from Leeds is that when Martinez and Varane had the ball, we had, let's say, Dalot pushed on a little bit, we had Luke Shaw pushed on a little bit, and it's got to a point now where Erik ten Hag has realised, I think he realised after the Brentford and Brighton games towards the start of the season, he realised he cannot trust Fred in these positions. If you have Fred here under pressure, in this role where you've got one player, you've got two players locking onto him, he's probably going to lose the ball. So the solution to Fred not being great in build-up, to being really inconsistent, is nope, you're not sitting here as a deep-line midfielder. Get as far up the pitch as you possibly can. We don't want you involved deep, because if you lose it, we're going to concede. Get away. Run away. Same thing with McTominay. Get them as high up the pitch, as far away from our own goal as possible, so they don't cause our own problems for us. So what that meant was our structure against Leeds in midweek looked a little bit like this. So we had the two here, we had Varane and Martinez, and in front of them, we often had a 1. Now, sometimes it would be Shaw or Dalot dropping in to make it a 3 and a 1. But the important point here really is that we only had Sabitzer there. So what it meant for Leeds was that in terms of their pressing, they set up really narrow. It's, again, something we've talked about a lot on this show is the concept of minimum width. So rather than sort of trying to defend the whole of the pitch, if you defend narrow, it means that if the opposition do manage to progress the ball forwards, you're going to have a lot of players around there because your players aren't really wide. They're around the ball, they can collapse quickly, and when they turn it over, because you've got players in sort of tight areas, you can sort of capitalise on the chaos that ensues by 1, 2, 3, 4, really quick passes, incisive, without having to hit big switches of play. So the idea for Leeds is channel it to one side or channel it into the centre, be narrow, be compact around the ball, and play vertical football. Get the ball forward quickly into players that are around the ball. Chaos. Maximum chaos. That is Leeds United. So bear that in mind then. bearing that in mind, the pressing structure that they employed against this 2-1 system, it had Bamford, it had Nonto, and it had Jack Harrison in the front line here. So what they were trying to do here is sort of screen any balls into the central areas here from United, meaning that we'd have to go round the sides and try and play in that way. And the issue is, because obviously we can't have Fred in these deeper lying areas, Sabitzer had just come into the team, he barely played before that, doesn't really know what he's doing in that role yet in terms of, isn't adapted to his teammates. So it was hard enough to get the ball into Sabitzer, and when we did get the ball into him, he wasn't quite sort of able yet to sort of find those balls forward between the lines into pockets, wasn't quite able to sort of find the fullbacks for switches of play, as we saw him do at the weekend on Sunday a lot better. So Leeds made it really difficult with that narrow midfield, and then behind that you've got these three sort of tucking in as well, Somerville, McKennie and Adams, meaning that even if we do get the ball forward, it's going to be turned over pretty quickly because they've got aggressive players in that area. So it was really, really frustrating to play against. And that's the problem that Erik ten Hag had to contend with coming into Sunday's game, was that we weren't able to get the ball forwards. We were just stuck in this cycle, getting pressed closer and closer towards our own goal as the Leeds players creep up and up the pitch. You give it back to De Gea and ball's lost straight away. Guaranteed turnover when it goes back to De Gea. It's not nice, but that's just the reality. Even if you're a De Gea fan, his kicking, no, not having it. So that was the problem Erik ten Hag had to face. So as all good managers do, he had to come up with a solution of how he dealt with that, and this was the solution. So obviously there's a few changes to the team. Harry Maguire comes in and Luke Shaw comes into central defence in place of Varane and Martinez, and you've got Malacia starting at left back. So in terms of those changes, what you can say straight away is that obviously with Varane missing, he's sort of resting him in preparation for the trip to Barcelona on Thursday. Luke Shaw's likely to play at centre-back alongside him because Martinez is suspended, and that means Malacia is likely to come into the team. And you don't want to be bringing players in from the cold when they've not played for 2-3 weeks, straight into a game at the Nou Camp against a really impressive Barcelona team. So it makes sense to give them some game time beforehand. So the changes there, you had Maguire, you had Luke Shaw, you had Malacia, and in front of them we had Jadon Sancho brought in for Alejandro Garnacho, who had started on the left at Old Trafford. Luke Ayling hadn't really given him a kick all game. Now, in terms of the personnel there, a lot of people were saying that they would have liked Pellistri to start on the right because he was pretty good when he came on at Old Trafford in a reverse fixture, but what you've got to remember here, especially with young players, is the environment is so important. You bring someone like that into a game at Elland Road, and look, Pellistri's a young kid, he's been on loan in Spain, you bring him into one of the most heated games in English football where challenges are going to be flying in. He will get clattered in the first 10-15 minutes, a Leeds player will go sliding in, probably knee high, do the best they can to try and injure him, as they were seeing. We saw Ayling go in a few times. McKennie was getting stuck in everywhere, all over the pitch. Same with Tyler Adams. You've got to make sure you're bringing in youngsters to the right environment, because if you bring Pellistri, Garnacho into that environment, they're going to get clattered, and for the rest of the game they're going to be anonymous because they're not really going to want to keep going at it. So you've got to build them up slowly and bring them in the right games. So I think that's why Erik ten Hag didn't necessarily go with Pellistri in that game, and that's why he brought in Sancho instead. Obviously, he was pretty good on Wednesday when he came on, but that's why I think he went with Rashford on the left in his best position, Sancho on the right rather than Pellistri, and then Weghorst up top. So, in terms of adapting to that tactical problem that Leeds had given us, the way Ten Hag had us set up was completely different in the sense of we weren't just relying on Fred get up the pitch and we'll rely solely on Sabitzer to progress the ball in there. What we saw instead was Malacia tucking in here. Now, in the Eredivisie, before he came to United, Malacia played a lot of time, spent a lot of time playing in inverted roles. So he's quite used to this, and obviously he's decent on both feet, so that's an advantage in those areas, meaning that if we do get the ball into him, let's get a ball onto the pitch. If we do manage to get the ball into him, he's able to sort of play both ways as much as possible, which is partly why I think maybe he was even more suited to that role than someone like Luke Shaw. So again, similar theme in terms of getting Fred up the pitch, getting Malacia in here, but the idea is that now, rather than just having a 2-1 or a 3-1, as it sometimes was, we've got these two in here as well. So what it means is we've got more of these lines. You can look at these lines as sort of passing connections. The more of those you got, in general, probably the easier you're going to find it to get out of your own third and get up the pitch. And with this back three here, we built up with Dalot, Maguire and Luke Shaw, sort of forming a back three there. The idea was pretty simple in terms of with Malacia tucking in, what we can do is we can overload the opposition's back line. So if I bring the opposition up the pitch to give a little bit of a better reflection on what it looks like, what you can see straight away is that up against the back four, we've got Rashford up against Ayling there, you've got Fred in sort of a high maybe almost like a number 10 position in the pockets that side. You've got Weghorst, you've got Bruno Fernandes sort of in the pockets the opposite side, although he can drift in here, and you've got Jadon Sancho. So on that last line of the opposition there, you've got a 5v4. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against the opposition's back 4. So the idea was, if we can be secure enough and retain the ball in this structure here, we're outnumbering the opposition back line. So as long as we can beat the first line of the press, which was quite difficult to do, as we'll come on to in a second, we have a good chance of overloading the opposition's back line and being able to create a chance. And with Malacia tucking in field, what it does is it brings Somerville in field as well, meaning that Rashford's isolated in a massive space here alongside Luke Ayling. So the idea there was make that space as big as possible, and 1v1, Marcus Rashford at the moment is going to beat pretty much anybody on the planet. However, things weren't quite so easy. So the reason that Ten Hag had changed the shape was to give us more success in that first phase, more chance of building out, and that's why he brought in Harry Maguire, because Rafael Varane, for all his brilliance defensively, I don't think there's very many better in the world in terms of the way he takes everything in his stride defensively. He so rarely has to break stride or do something unexpected because he knows exactly what's going to happen pretty much all the time. But when he's on the ball, he's not the best at sort of breaking lines, passing forward, playing out from the back. To be fair to him, he does his best in terms of moving the ball quickly left to right, but he's not really going to pass forwards and break lines too much. So that's why Harry Maguire was in for this game, because what he's got in his locker that we've got a ball on the pitch, yes we do, that Varane hasn't got, is that he's obviously got the big diagonal out wide left to Marcus Rashford. He can play it out to Jadon Sancho as well at times, but also in general he should be a little bit better at breaking lines than Rafael Varane was. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out that way. Maguire's numbers for progressive passing and ball progression were fantastic, by the way, from the game, but he did make far too many mistakes. And to be honest, as much as I defended Maguire before the game for his selection, I could understand the reasons behind it. It is just frustrating at times how slow he is to do anything. It's just hip mobility just doesn't exist. He can't turn. And there was that one where he was trying to pass it back to De Gea, turned like a bus. It was horrendous. So bad. I don't know what I was watching, and that was the frustration with Harry Maguire. So in terms of what we saw here, because the Leeds pressure, Leeds took a little bit of time to adapt, and the way they sort of tried to press was that Bamford, Gnonto and Harrison, in the game on Wednesday, sort of kept it really narrow to try and screen these passes in there, and they weren't really too worried about going out and pressing Dalot, pressing Maguire, pressing Luke Shaw. Their first job, and you can see if you watch any clips from this game, these three constantly, when they're pressing or watching the United players on the ball here in this back three, they're sort of standing behind them all the time, so they know they're always between the ball and the United midfielders, so that this ball into midfield cannot happen. What that meant was that then, as long as they're between the ball and the midfielder, they can slowly start creeping up and up and up the pitch, meaning United are just slowly passing side to side to side, going back, deeper and deeper towards our own goal. What that means in turn is that United midfielders come deeper and deeper and deeper. These midfielders can push up and up and up and up and up. And eventually, what happens, if you can't play through the press, you're going to have to play around it or you're going to have to go over it. So at times then, because Leeds have forced us deeper and deeper and deeper, whether it's Shaw, Maguire, Dalot or even De Gea, we kick that ball long. But the issue is, we didn't win enough of the first contacts. Wout Weghorst, despite being 6'6", isn't that great in the air. He's got a lot of other good facets to his game, as we'll come on to later, but in the air he wasn't really that great. Leeds won a lot of the first contacts, and these balls were getting nodded down into midfield. And the issue is that because this sort of back five here of United, this 3-2 build-up structure, had constantly been forced deeper and deeper and deeper towards our own goal, all that meant was that every single second ball was dropping into this area here, and the Leeds players were getting there first. So because we weren't able to get the ball out of the pressure, this group was coming deeper, deeper, deeper. When we eventually get forced to go long, we couldn't then win the second ball. And that was causing us the problems because, in general, we should be able to do all right on second balls because we've got a lot of tall players. You know, Rashford's decent in the air now, as he's proving. Weghorst's okay. Fred's pretty good at second balls in terms of recovering quickly because he's really agile, really quick on his feet. You back Malacia in those situations as well, small, wiry, a bit of a ratty type player in those situations. But the problem was this gap here was just becoming far too big because of the way Leeds were pressing and forcing us up the pitch. So that gave us problems. And it meant that going into the second half, Erik Ten Hag had some work to do because United weren't able to get the ball forwards, we weren't able to sustain our attacks, we weren't able to create too much. So Erik Ten Hag had to make some changes. The changes he made was he brought off Jadon Sancho, he brought off Tyrell Malacia, brought on Lisandro Martinez and brought on Alejandro Garnacho. So the team looked a little bit like this. Weghorst came to the number 10 position, Rashford up front, Bruno Fernandes to the right, Garnacho on the left. You've got Shaw back at left back in his preferred position. And the idea here was that basically this idea he'd gone into the game with in terms of making it into a 3-2 with Sabitzer and Malacia tucking in here, it hadn't worked. We hadn't been able to play through the lines because every time we did get the ball on Sabitzer or Malacia in those areas, it was just coming straight back. And we weren't really actually playing any football. They weren't able to get on the half turn and play forwards. So instead, Ten Hag realised we needed to start playing around the block or around the press or over the press. So instead what we saw was rather than having multiple players in this area, we had Luke Shaw wide, we had Dalot or Wan-Bissaka as it happened later, playing wider, Bruno Fernandes playing sort of just inside here in these areas to get on the ball a little bit more in midfield, Garnacho quite wide up on Luke Ayling, with Luke Shaw able to overlap and go round. And what this did in terms of the way it changed the game is obviously because of Rashford being on, the Leeds defence were worried about his pace in behind, so they had to drop deeper and deeper and deeper, and Wout Weghorst was then able to come into the game and start winning second balls. And because Dalot or Wan-Bissaka pushed higher, Gnonto got dragged back and Sabitzer was able to get on the ball in these right-back positions quite a lot, come a little bit deeper here. And as you see for the first goal, he picked up the ball in an area like this, switched it out to Luke Shaw, the opposite side. Brilliant ball out there. Luke Shaw crosses it in for Marcus Rashford and a brilliant header back there. So what Ten Hag did was that he realised that, look, this attempt to sort of play forward through the lines, it's not really working. We're not going to outplay them. We're not going to break the press. Instead, we're going to focus on our play down the wide areas. So what you can see in this here, you can see in this heat map we've got here, you can see that United were really forced to play in those wide areas either side because we weren't able to have that success going through the middle. And what Ten Hag had done there is he'd sort of noticed the problem, rectified it with a different solution, and because of that, we were able to see as well that United were able to get on the ball more in central areas. So because we had more threat wider, that forced the Leeds players a little bit wider, sort of disjointed their press a little bit, and then you were able to get Sabitzer at times sort of playing 1 and 2 touch stuff in these areas a little bit more than they had done before. But the key change really was bringing Fernandes and Weghorst into this area where they can get on top of the second balls rather than being disconnected, and bringing Garnacho on up against Luke Ayling without losing sort of the threat of Rashford, because Garnacho was brilliant when he came on and is sort of fantastic when there's space to attack him behind. And then also Luke Shaw in his best position again, able to get down the side on the overlap and cause all sorts of threat and all sorts of chaos. So you've got to give Erik ten Hag credit. He saw the problems, changed the game completely with his substitutions, and it worked brilliantly in the end. Playing around Leeds caused us sort of the big switches from Sabitzer, which is one of the things he's fantastic at. Very little backlift, able to play those switches without any warning for the defence really, out one side or out the other side, and that is what changed the game for United. Getting Sabitzer into these wider areas, less emphasis on playing through the middle, and letting the good players do the rest of the work. Sabitzer, long ball out to Luke Shaw, into Rashford, and this guy, at the moment, anytime he gets a chance, he's going to score. So, that's how United beat Leeds. Fingers crossed we do the same thing in Barcelona on Thursday night. I can't wait for the game. I am buzzing for this. Let me know what you think of the video down in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, smash that subscribe button as well if you're not already. And cheers for watching, and we'll see you again very soon.